Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, the Democratic Alliance has gone to court to unseat the new Johannesburg mayor. The parties filed court papers to overturn the election of the ANC's Dada Morero as mayor, and it says it cannot be held accountable for the collapse of the Johannesburg coalition. Meanwhile, Action SA says it needs a break from working with the DA in Joburg. Why did the coalition fail, and was it, or rather, what is the impact of coalition politics on service delivery? Let's discuss this now with public policy specialist TK Pooe. TK, good morning and thank you very much for your time. Honestly, a very interesting few days, but many say it was bound to happen. South Africa is a young democracy and there will be a few mistakes around coalitions really at the beginning now. What did you make of everything that we've seen in the last couple of days?
Thanks for having me. I think two things for me kind of stand out. It's not so much the youth of our democracy. It's so much I think it's probably the ego within our politics as it pertains to how you manage coalitions. Look, coalitions, I've always said, look, they're going to be problematic in South Africa because we have too many egos in the room. And it was actually quite interesting just to observe how the DA almost went against its core beliefs. The DA purports itself to be a federalist organization, which is to say it decentralizes power to cities and to provinces. But in this instance, the meddling from the national office of the DA, and especially its chairperson, I think Ms. Zille, kind of created its own issues and tensions, and we kind of saw those tensions play out. So when I mean ego, that's what I'm speaking about. And I think the problematic one, which I think is more systemic as it relates to coalitions that we're going to see down the line in South Africa, is what the basis of them, what are they really based upon? Now, I think we always look to overseas examples such as Germany and, Scandinavian countries. But what you kind of see there is they are almost in law and part of practice of the culture of the country. We just do not have that. And I think it's almost quite whimsical that it doesn't happen. And I think what we're most likely to see, and I think this is quite problematic for South Africans as it touches on service deliveries, is a situation you see next door in Lesotho where coalitions come quickly together. They look at an enemy, in this instance it's always the ANC, but they never look at the bigger goal and say, listen, we're in it to do X and Y for citizens. It's about keeping the ANC out. Because if it was a true coalition, even the ANC would have been spoken to say, listen, let's get the best for our parties and for our citizens. And I think that's not really what's happening. And that's what, for me, kind of the two things that stand out for me.
No, it's an honestly interesting point you make, because for the longest time we've heard that the intention was to get the ANC out, but in defense of those political parties, they would say we had reasons, legitimate reasons why we wanted to get the ANC out. They had displayed a level of corruption, there was poor service delivery, so at this point they probably felt that the rot is across the board in the political party. They cannot single out individuals and say this particular individual, if at the helm, will yield the positive results we want for this particular metro. So what would you say to that argument if they actually put it forward?
I'll say it's a fair one, but then my retort would usually be, if that then is the case, and you put this out, then surely what should then happen, if this is true, is that your coalition should be long-lasting, which is to say, you guys are going to make it work, and make it work to the point that you actually show up the ANC as being this corrupt, wholly ineffective party. Because you see, if the weakness within your coalition is seen by the voters at large to not be able to be long-lasting, then the question is going to be, yes, we know what the ANC is. I think most South Africans know what the ANC is. It's not a secret. It's a very unprofessional party. It's filled with people that seem to look after themselves rather than the general population. Everybody knows that. That's not the secret. But what the population and citizens are looking for is to say, can you give us something genuine which we can look out for? And then it becomes problematic if you cannot do that, because what you're basically then saying is we're not a coalition that is really based on a firm principle of we're going to get service delivery done and dusted. We're a coalition that basically says we're going to keep out the ANC and maybe we might get service delivery done. I think that for me is the bigger issue, because South African politics we should be at the 2 decades where it should be about performance and service delivery. And I think probably later on we might actually define what we mean by service delivery and how it gets affected. Because again, this specter of the ANC, I always find it problematic. For me, if you're being pragmatic, it would be to say, surely you know what the ANC is good at, and what the ANC is good at is, for some reason, they're able to speak to your more informal people who live in more informal settlements, people who live in more township areas. And I think you should be able to come to them and say, listen, we understand that this is what you really are good at. Let's make an agreement in such a way that we can keep an eye on you, knowing that you guys have let's say, you've got an ability, or let's say a habit of wanting to stretch your hands into city coffers. But let's really make it a point of saying, this is what you're good at. Let's put you there, but be on alert that we are going to keep an eye on you. Because for me, that's when we're going to really get to genuine coalitions in South Africa, when it becomes about all political parties, not just keeping one out, even if they've got a bad track record.
But if we had to delve into the issues right now that have led to this dispute or the decision to walk it alone for most of those political parties, here at the heart of it, you have the Democratic Alliance saying there was an agreement in place and that they found the opposition parties that they were in coalition with it to be in breach by merely proposing. But another element is their court battle, that here they're saying at the heart of it, firstly, you have a programming committee, they didn't curate. So that whole 4 days or 5 days leading up to the election of even the mayor, or election or installation of the mayor, was something that was unlawful. Are there prospects of success on that element? And then we come back to discuss whether the other opposition parties were in breach.
Well, I put it like this. No one wins in court. The court just basically tells you who was legally correct. But what we're dealing here is a political situation. We're not dealing with a legal situation. So it's almost, I guess we've heard this a lot. You can kind of equate it to a divorce where, look, both parties, the wife and the husband, could be right for the reasons for why they seek the divorce. But in the middle of this is a situation called the child and the citizens and the issue of service delivery. Because how then do you go back to the same table? Let's say there is a winner in this or a loser in this. How do you go back to the same table and renegotiate? Because it will always be an issue that, look, rather than being mature and saying, listen, let's politically sort this out, to say, listen, DA, clearly there are issues of egos which you have. You kind of always overestimate yourself. And then to the other political parties, say, listen, we kind of have to respect that there is a party that comes in with a majority of the votes, and that we also need to find a middle ground to this. And if you don't do that, we're basically going to be in a cycle of you are wrong, I'm right. Right? You take it to the court. The court is not going to make coalitions happen. The court is simply going to tell you what happened legally in this process. And I think that's the problem for.
But is that not something that they would
coalition.
need? Apologies there, but is that not something they would need to be adjudicated upon? Because they're saying it's purely based on principle. They fully understand that beyond the court process, the numbers don't tally in their favor. So they'll have to go to the drawing board and come up with a political situation or accept their place in opposition. But nevertheless, they're saying on principle, if there was an unlawful sitting, they need to remedy that and not allow for such a situation now to become a trend where there will be sittings where perhaps they don't curate according to their allegations, that it didn't curate, and then you let it be and say that, well, anyway, even if we go to court, the outcome will not be in our favor insofar as us installing our own mayor. They're saying it's purely based on principle.
Well, look, I think that there's also procedures within law which allows for you not to necessarily go to court, but to actually bring in legal experts who then would be able to say, listen, before you even go to court, let's just say have a arbitration, I think is the wording that one is looking for here, where they could basically tell you who was wrong, who was right from a legal perspective without having gone to courts. For me, that is a better way of doing it. If your issue is purely, like you're saying, the principles of saying, listen, this should not happen again, that if, let's say it's an illegal sitting, we all have an agreement and understanding what it means. If that is what you really are looking for in principle, just have an arbitration, bring in a legal expert who'll be able to say, listen, you're right, you are wrong, solely based on this issue that you're raising, and then people's lives can go on. But I have a sense that that's not really what they're looking for. What they're looking for is to be able to say, listen, I win something in court, I then go to the general population, I come to the media and say, I told you, these guys were wrong, X and Y, X and Y. And then basically just creates another cycle where we're blaming X and Y rather than actually addressing the whole issue. Because what I'm trying to say, maybe in a long-winded way, is to say, I'm really doubtful that that really is the principle that they're looking for.
And then on the side of Action SA, I mean, we listened all. It seems they articulated their position very well. It seems at this point they're saying it's inevitable. Probably Egurleni is going to suffer the same fate, and it's also going to happen in Tshwane. Are you of the view that this would be the case, or they can resuscitate or save those coalitions currently because they're still in those coalition agreements?
2 points on that. One, I think when it comes to Action SA, they've shown themselves to be highly pragmatic. So it wouldn't be surprising if after, maybe after next week when Pooe heads up to the table and say, listen, on the city of Joburg, look, we'll just have to accept what the situation is. But on other ones, look, there's room for discussion. They're not necessarily going to break apart. They've shown themselves to be pragmatic. But it goes back to the issue, which have also they have to deal with the ANC. So again, there's good reasons, and I'm not really taking that away. But again, it's to say, are you willing to look at coalitions as a whole, or are you willing to simply say this is about keeping X party away? And if that's the case, you never really enrich this idea of what a coalition is in the broader South African public.
No, TK, very interesting insights there. Thank you very much for your participation. That's Public Policy Specialist TK Pooe. Now, just